This is how to install the Visual Studio Code. And these are the requirements in installing the Visual Studio Code. Just search how to download Visual Studio Code and select the first link. Depending on the OS, then download and wait for the progress bar to finish. Once it's done, open it and run the installer. Make sure to agree the terms of agreement and browse to the location where you want to save it. In my case, I wanted to save it on my hard drive under temp folder. Then select OK, then next. No need to change the configuration, just select next to proceed. If you wanted to create a desktop icon, you can do so, then click on next. Now you have successfully installed the Visual Studio Code. So I'm now here inside of Visual Studio Code. When you first open VS Code, you may see a screen that looks something like this. It should most likely open this welcome screen. You don't have to have this welcome screen open. You can close it by pressing this button, but this just provides some shortcut, for example, to open a folder, clone a repository, create a new file, or review some of your recent project. So I'm going to start by closing this, and I will show you the first important aspect of VS Code, which is the Explorer tab. So you can see that there are some tabs right here. These are very frequently used tabs. You're probably going to use all of this when you're actually developing or writing code in VS Code. And this Explorer tab is kind of like your Windows or File Explorer. This Explorer tab allows you to view all of the files that are in your project, to create new files, to create new directories, to modify or manage files. So with that said, let's get started by creating a new VS Code project. I will also show you how to open an existing project. So to do this, we are going to go to File and we're going to press Open Folder. Now you'll notice that there's something called a workspace here. So in VS Code, we have kind of two distinguishing things that you can open: a folder or a workspace. Now, a workspace is just a folder that has VS Code settings that are specific to that workspace. So for example, it may have some test scripts that are set up such that there's shortcut to run them. It may have different font. It may have a different size for the editor. You can customize settings for a workspace. You can press open folder. So here in open folder, if you have a folder that you would like to open, so you have some project, you can just open that folder, or you can create a new folder, and then that will kind of create a new project. So here I'll make a new folder. I'll call this VS Code Quick Start. So now when I open this folder, VS Code will refresh and we can see that this folder is now open in our editor or in our Explorer sort. So from here, we can start by creating some new files or some new folder. So let's actually make a folder. I'll make a folder here and just call this test, and then inside of this folder I'll create a few files. I'll say test.py, that's a Python script, and then I will say test.html, that of course is an HTML script. Notice we get some fancy icons popping up here before the file, telling us that VS Code does actually know what these files are. You can right click on files and do anything that you normally would be able to do. You can copy them, you can paste them, you can move them around. For example, if I want to move this file outside of this test folder, I can just drag it out, and now it will ask me if I want to move this. I say yes, and now you can see this outside of this interior directory. Now, right above this tab here where it says VS Code Quick Start, you can see I have my Open Editors tab, and this will show you all of the files that you currently have open. So like in most ideas, you can have multiple files open here. Notice that when I double click on them, they will stay open in the editor here. And I can drag them around and move them as I please. Everything in VS Code is very intuitive and you can resize everything as you would intuitively think to be able to do. Now that we understand the File Explorer, how to open projects, and how to create a new project, I will show you the VS Code terminal, which in my opinion is one of the most useful and just nice to have features in VS Code. So to open the VS Code terminal, you can type the following command: Control and then backtick. Now backtick is on the same key as the tilde, which is kind of the squiggly line that no one knows what it's called. It is to the left of the one key and below the escape key. But there's also an easier way to open up the terminal. You can simply drag from the bottom of your screen and move it up. Now, this terminal is just like any default terminal that you would use. So if you're on Windows, this is going to be PowerShell or your standard command prompt. Now, first of all, whenever I work in VS Code, I like to work in full screen mode. So to get into the full screen mode in Visual Studio Code, you can press F11. Now, if you're on Mac, I believe this is going to be function F11. It may be a different key, but on Windows at least, press F11. This will toggle full screen mode. So anyways, I'm going to stay out of full screen mode so we can have an access to all of the file menu up here, and I'm going to show you the extensions pane. So when I press on extensions or I press Ctrl Shift and then X, it will show me all the extensions I have installed and recommend extensions for my development environment. So VS Code is great because by default it comes very bare bones. There's pretty much nothing installed by default. Whenever you start working in different languages or using specific frameworks or scripts, you're usually going to be prompted to install an extension for those. For example, you can see here I have 23 installed extensions, and extensions are just extra functionality for whatever it is that you're doing. So if I scroll down, you can see I have Python extension. Notice this has 31 million downloads. That is the one I worked on when I was at Microsoft. I also have this remote WSL extension and a bunch of other ones as well. So firstly, I'll show you how you can actually zoom in and zoom out of VS Code. Because notice my text is quite large. You probably don't want it this large when you're actually writing a code. So to do this, you can press Ctrl then minus and plus on your keyboard as you normally would. And this will shrink and zoom in and resize this VS Code window. Now, I just want you to know that this is zooming. So we are simply scaling the VS Code window. We are not actually changing the size of the font here, which I will show you on how to do in a minute when we get to the settings section. Anyways, I wanted to show you the search tab. So let's zoom in one more time. And here what we can do is just search for text. So if I wanted to search for, say, room join, which is some text that exists in my program, you can see it will show me all the files that have the text room join. All I have to do is press on this and it will bring me to where the text is defined. Now, if I want to replace some specific text, what I can do is type the text that I want to replace. So I could just say room join, and then maybe I want to replace that with join, and it will show me what this replacement will actually be, and I can now press this button right here to replace all. There's a few more settings here like match case, matchable word, and regular expression, but I won't get into those in this video. So that is the search tab. There's not more to talk about. And now I'm just going to show you a few kind of editing tricks or a few things that you can do in the editor itself. So one of those most common things or one of the most useful things that you can actually do in VS Code is you can find the definition of variables or of classes. So for example, I have I'm trying to find some variable here that this is going to be good for. I have this variable here called room code. So if I highlight this first of all, you can see it's highlighting all of the other room codes. But what I could do here is right click on this and click go to definition, go to type definition, go to implementations, go to references, pick and a ton of other useful things. So I won't really show you all of this because there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but I just wanted you to be aware that you can do things like this, and specifically if you're working in a type language. It's very useful to look at, say, all the references of a variable or look at where it was defined. Now, this isn't going to work very well in JavaScript, but if you're working in TypeScript or Java or C++, this would be a lot more useful. Anyways, if you want to do some basic stuff like you want to find text in a file, so you don't want to use the search tab here because this finds it in all the files in your directory in your project, you can press Ctrl F. It will bring up this right here, which will allow you to just search for things in this file. So of course you can press enter and it will bring you down to the different matches that it finds. Now, if you want to actually replace text, you can press Ctrl H. Now, this will open up this replace tab right here. You can also just press this little arrow and now you can find and replace. You can replace one at a time or you can replace all of the matches. Alright, so that is finding and replacing. Now, I will show you a few other interesting tricks that are very useful. For example, you can see we have all these windows open here. Sometimes you'll notice that when I open a file, so let's actually open this file, info.js, you say that this file is italicized. When the name of the file is italicized, that means that this is going to close when you open another file. So if I open homepage.js, notice that my info.js is going to close. If you want this to stay open, you can double click on it. Notice it will not go italicized now and then it will stay open. It will stay open if you make changes to the file itself. Anyways, once we have all of these files, a lot of times you want to view files side by side or up and down vertically. To do that, you can right click on the file and you can split this up, down, left or right. So if I split left, now I can see multiple files and I can resize the windows just by moving them around. Like this. I can also split again. So I could split this up and now you can see we have all these files open and you can play around with that yourself. Pretty straightforward and easy to figure out how that works. I also can just drag this file around to wherever I want, so I can drag it on here. I also could drag it up here and then it will automatically respond to that action. Alright, so now let's quickly go through the settings page of VS Code. There's not a lot of the settings that you need to modify. In fact, by default, you probably don't need to change anything in VS Code. But it is useful to know what some of these settings are. So when I press on this settings button right here, notice we have a few things popping up. The command palette, the settings menu, which you can access from Control plus comma, extensions, keyboard shortcuts, user snippets, color theme, and a bunch of other things. So actually, let's change the color theme first. This is probably the first thing you're going to want to do. We'll go color theme and you see I'm using Manaki or whatever you say that. I probably mispronounced that. We could change this way to say Solarized Dark. Let's change this to something else now. Let's go with light default, which I think looks horrible. Let's change this now back to the one that I like. Okay, so this is my favorite one by far, but everyone has their own preferences. And then I will show you a very useful thing here. So if you press this on the settings button and you open the command palette, this is something that you're going to use all of the time in VS Code. So a lot of the extensions that you install will have some commands that come with them. Now to open the command palette, you of course can press settings and then you can open it manually, or you can press Control Shift and P on your keyboard. So this opens up the command palette, and inside of here you can type a ton of different commands. So for example, if I type Python, you can see all of the commands that are prefaced by Python. Now of course I can't really go through all these commands because this depends on the extension that you're using. But if you're looking for a specific command, say like copy, just type in the command palette and see if it pops up. And chances are you'll find something that you're looking for. Another useful one is format document. So if you have a formatter installed, you can press format document with, and then you can pick the formatter that you want to use. In this case, you can see only the FIDA is the only one that I have, so I press FIDA and it will automatically format this document for me. Alright, so that's the basic of the command palette. The next thing I'm going to show you is the File Explorer. So yes, there is File Explorer here, but if you want to search for a file name, what you can do is press Ctrl P. This will now bring up the search file by name. I don't really know the name of this, but you can do is just search for files. So I can search for say util.py, it will show up here. I can press that to open that file. Very useful, saves you a lot of time. Now there's a ton of keyboard shortcuts in Visual Studio Code. To find them, you can go to the settings menu, and in fact, let's do that. So let's now go to settings, so Control plus comma, and this is where we can change all of the settings for VS Code. So you can see we have our font size. This is an important one. You can also search for all of our settings up here, and there's a ton of other things that we can change. So I'll let you guys mess around with this on your own. There's not too much for me to go through here, but the first thing you're probably going to want to change is the font size if you're like me and you like the font to be nice and large. Alright, so that is the settings page in VS Code. Now I will show you the debug window, and I will show you the GitHub window. So let me actually open up a new project to illustrate this. I have opened up a new project, and now I will show you how to run a file. I will show you this GitHub window and this run and debug window. So first of all, if you want to run a file, this of course depends on the type of file that you're using. But for Python files, for example, there is this run button at the top of the screen. So if I were to type in some code here, let's say print hello and then world, then what I can do is save this file, Control S, and then run. Now when I run, notice it's going to open up a terminal, and then I will see my output down here. So that's the easiest it is to run your code. But again, this depends on the type of file that you're using, and this is going to be different depending on what stack you have. Anyways, what I will show you now is a GitHub window. So for this GitHub window, what I need to do is initialize a GitHub repository. But if I was already in a GitHub repository, then you would see what we're about to see. So what I'm going to do is initialize a repository, and this is really going to do for us is run the command git init and creates a new GitHub repository. And now notice inside of this we have our source control window, which is showing me all the changes that I've made. I can add these changes to the staging area by pressing this plus button, and I can also remove them from the staging area by pressing the minus button. I also can revert all of the changes. That's open file, but here I believe I can revert all the changes by pressing discard changes, and then once I have the files in the staging area that I want to make a commit for, I can type in my commit message. So say something like first commit, and then I can press the check mark, which will actually commit all of these changes. So now you can see the little 2 goes away saying that hey, we have no files in the staging. Now from here I can do a bunch of other things. I can toggle the view mode, which allows me to actually see all of the changes that I've made to my files in my code editor. I also can refresh my GitHub repository. I can press these 3 dots to do things like pull, push, change branches, and all of the other standard GitHub commands you would normally want to use. There is a nice interface for GitHub in VS Code. Alright, so now we understand GitHub, and of course there's a lot more to go through, but I won't cover it all here. Let's talk about this run and debug window. So this run and debug window allows you to run and debug files. So notice that when I'm on the HTML file, it's not really giving me any meaningful output because I can't really run and debug my HTML file. But for my Python file here, I can press run and debug, and then it will ask me how I want to debug this. So you can choose your method. I'm just going to go with Python. And then it will bring up this little debugger window and it will run. Now I didn't place any breakpoints, so we didn't really get any meaningful debug output, and I'm not going to go through debugging in the depth. I have an entire video on how to debug, but the basics are you can press breakpoints by going in the gutter here. So this is called the gutter, and if I highlight over this, it should say place breakpoint. Anyways, you can see these little red dots are different breakpoints in your program. And then at the bottom here, you can see that we have this breakpoint window, which is showing us where the breakpoints are. Anyways, if I run and debug my file with a breakpoint, so let's go ahead and do that. As soon as I hit that breakpoint in my program, it's going to stop. I can see all of the variables on the left hand side of my screen. I can type in expressions to watch from right here. I also can play, I can step forward, I can step into, and I can step out of it. I can also restart, stop, and of course play and pause. So that is kind of the basics of the debug window. Again, I don't want to go into depth of any of this stuff, just showing you what exists. There's a few other windows here, for example, Remote Explorer and SQL tools. I'm not going to talk about those in this video. In fact, I think that covered pretty much in my video. Last thing that I will mention is that there's a ton more stuff in VS Code. For example, you can modify the appearance, going in full screen mode, going in something called Zen mode, which removes all of the gutters and all of the side menus. I believe to get out of this, you just press F11. It removes you from full screen mode. There's a few other interesting things like your editor layout, which you can change, and just a ton of stuff in VS Code. It's super useful, super versatile, and also keep in mind there's this little kind of bottom menu here that shows you some useful information. So anyways, that is all I wanted to cover. Welcome to the second part of the video. The Decoder app. This is the additional information for the Decoder app. First, let's go to Google Play Store. Search for the Decoder app. Click install. Then click the register to login. I'm gonna use my Gmail. Now that we're successfully logged in, you can enter your referral code if available. Let's explore. Here you can see different types of projects that you can make. This is different type of languages. I'm gonna go with Python. Python 3. enter the project name and I'm gonna name it test. Leave it to the default, then click open. This is our main.py. Let's change it a bit. Let's put hello world. Then let's try to run it. As you can see, it is successfully run. Now let's try to save. I'm gonna save it as test 1. Now let's exit. And as you can see, your recent files, you can open it.